All right. Well, hello, Facebook and YouTube and everybody in Faithwire land here. Trey Goins-Phillips and I were about to go through the news of the day. This is a live recording of our podcast, which will be posted obviously right after. But we are just going to roll with the recording here live, and we'll get started here in just a second. Trey, hopefully no appearances from Piper today. Piper is Trey's dog, who often likes to bark in the middle of this. So
Right. Yeah.
this recording.
It's, having a little dog is like the worst thing when you're trying to record a podcast, but that's okay.
All right. Well, let's fire this thing up. And if anybody's online watching, feel free to, maybe we'll hang around after if there's any stories you want covered or anything of that nature. But this is a new podcast we're launching here called 4 and 3. Basically just going through some of the top stories of the day from a Christian perspective, a little news and comment here from Trey and myself as part of the Faithwire and CBN team here. So this is the live recording, so we're gonna fire it up here and get rolling. So stand by here. I'm just gonna make sure I got all the buttons in the right place. So all right, here we go.
Faithwire.com.
Well, hello and welcome to 4 and 3, the podcast breaking down 4 of the most important stories of the day and 3 things you need to know about them, all from a Christian perspective. Today's Thursday, May 20th, 2021. I'm Dan Andros, and coming up on the podcast today, lawmakers are calling on investigations into COVID's origins. And Google Docs is updating its autocorrect algorithms to be more inclusive. Not too insufferable or anything. Hillsong Church founder Brian Houston went on the Today Show today to address kind of the future of Hillsong Church after the Carl Lentz fiasco there. And Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is only accepting interviews from black and brown journalists. A lot to go over here, as always, with Trey Goins-Phillips from Faithwire.com. Trey, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. I can't help but think it's kind of funny with stories 2 and 4. Like Google is going to be more inclusive with its algorithms, and Chicago's mayor is going to be less inclusive, but we'll say that, but somehow it ends up being more inclusive by her just limiting journalists to the color of their skin. So it's just a topsy-turvy world in which we live.
Indeed. We are going to start today. Story number 1, Trey, with the investigations that are being called for into COVID here and the origins of it. Because if you would recall, the Wuhan lab theory was dismissed by many people early on. And so now 18 leading scientists want a new investigation into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. In a letter published in the Journal of Science, the team questioned the conclusions reached earlier this year by the team that was chosen by the World Health Organization to look into what caused the viral outbreak in Wuhan, China. The WHO team concluded that a laboratory origin of the pandemic was extremely unlikely and animal to human infection was very likely, this despite having very little evidence for that. Rand Paul, a Kentucky senator, questioned government COVID-19 expert Dr. Anthony Fauci during a hearing last week about whether the U.S. National Institute of Health, the NIH, funded research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He asked Dr. Fauci, he said, do you still support funding of NIH, funding of the lab in Wuhan? And so they went back and forth on this. Dr. Fauci basically tried to deny this. And he said, you're entirely and completely incorrect on this. The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute. That's the type of research that they're alleged to be doing with COVID-19 that caused it to get leaked out. And Senator Paul, in turn, then accused Fauci of supporting that gain of function research, which he later tweeted his information on that. But Ranking Intelligence Committee member Rep. Devin Nunes from California said after the gain of function research stopped in the U.S. in 2014, the NIH gave millions to a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance, and a portion of that funding then went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And so what did the NIH say to that allegation? The director, Dr. Francis Collins, said they didn't approve that funding for that use and said, we can't prevent somebody who has an intention of deceiving us from doing it. So very murky waters here. Funding, I mean, he's basically admitting there that the funding did essentially make its way over there, but said, well, we had no idea. We didn't know they were going to do that. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo challenged China to release evidence that disproves the Wuhan lab theory and argued that all of the circumstantial evidence is pointing into the direction that the lab was the source of the spread of the virus and that China's doing everything they can to cover it up. International efforts to discover the true source of the virus, however, have been stymied by a lack of cooperation from China. That's what the report from Nunes and his team said. He said, nevertheless, significant circumstantial evidence raises serious concerns that the COVID-19 outbreak may have indeed been a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They also pointed to China's history of having research lab leaks and infections, and warnings from U.S. diplomats in early as 2017 that the Wuhan lab was conducting, quote, dangerous research on coronaviruses without following, quote, necessary safety protocols and risking the accidental outbreak of a pandemic. So this concern was on the radar of many people as far back as 2017. And so now, as it stands, people are looking at this original idea that it came from a natural occurrence from some animals and then transferred to humans. They're saying there's less evidence for that than the lab theory, which was kind of dismissed as a conspiracy early on. So what's the left saying? Well, the left continues to swat down the Wuhan lab theory as a conspiracy theory. The New York Times referred to it as a fringe theory when Senator Tom Cotton brought it up. CNN called it almost certainly not true. They also retweeted China's propaganda on the story at the time. NPR, MSNBC all debunked the lab theory as a conspiracy. Chris Hayes called Trump desperate for mentioning it. So the left has been very, very much on that, dismissing it as misinformation. What's the right saying? Well, most on the right are not saying that we know for sure, but mostly they're critical of those dismissals of the lab theory from the outset when it wasn't really wasn't proven with facts that you could rule it out. So why does it matter? It matters for a lot of reasons, Trey. We've got, we need to know how the virus started, first of all. I mean, that's the obvious one. So we can prevent future ones, find out more information about what led to it. And China they need to be held accountable if they were indeed reckless or worse, intentional in letting this virus out. So, and then the media went on a barrage of misinformation claims. I mean, we saw people getting banned and their accounts getting banned for quote unquote misinformation. So if the media wants to really get to the truth and be trusted and have factual information and can be considered factual, they can't simply dismiss possibilities and theories because of politics or some other agenda. I think we know trust in the media is already at an all-time low, and this type of reporting only makes it worse. So I think there's a lot at stake here.
Yeah, I think it's been bizarre since day one how willing the media is to just trust China. Well, like if China is saying this, I mean, there's no reason that it shouldn't be true. I mean, even if you Googled the case numbers in China as opposed to the United States. Google was just going with whatever China said, which I think was for the longest time like 84,000 cases total. Yeah. It's like, does anybody believe that that's right. That's actually the number of cases that China, the most populous country and the origin of coronavirus, do we really think that that's their number? But the media just kind of ran with it and accepted what China said as truth. And also, I think it's kind of it's just frustrating to see the way that Fauci answered those questions to Rand Paul, because it was so like sneaky, right? Like he said over and over again, like, well, we didn't fund that kind of research in China, in the Wuhan lab. So it's like the operative word there was in. Yeah. It's like, yeah, you're right. You didn't fund it in the Wuhan lab, but you did send them money. And that's, has been proven, or is at least that looks like what happened, is that the money was at least sent there, and then it was kind of like, well, we don't know what they did with it. Yeah. But it was just frustrating to hear Fauci just say, well, with the word in, so technically he's right. Yeah. Yeah, and the money. I mean, it's the NIH director there in that quote. I mean, didn't seem to deny
that money that initially
Right.
started with them ended up there. They don't seem to deny that. They just say, look, we can't control what these people do. So it seems like there needs to be more investigation into how those funds got there, who knew what,
Yeah.
with where those funds were going, and then just to further to really take this, Drew Holden has a great Twitter account he does a lot of threads, and he had a thorough one on how the media reported on the Wuhan lab
Mm.
theory, and it was just so dismissive. And now you have all these virologists and others coming forward and saying, wait a minute, I think we need to ask some more questions here because, you can't trust China. I mean, I think we all know this at this point. You
Right.
can't, the WHO's like, well, we asked China and they said it didn't come out of the lab. Oh, well, that clears it up. I mean, I think we need to be a little more discerning than that and not just take China's word for it. That it didn't come from the
Yeah.
lab. I mean, this is the same country that's rounding up Muslims and putting them in concentration camps. So, um,
Yeah.
so, so yeah, I think more work needs to be done there.
For sure. All right. Story number two. Speaking of Google, Alphabet, the parent company for Google, announced this week that it has updated its algorithms for Google Docs in order to be more inclusive. So, for example, the app will begin autocorrecting to use more gender neutral terms. It said like mail carrier instead of mailman, and chair or chairperson instead of chairman. So, this shift comes a few years after an even more obvious turn away from terms that are based on a person's sex. So in 2018, according to the Daily Mail, Google stopped suggesting he, her, or him in its predictive text for Gmail because it could offend some users. So at the time, product leaders told Reuters, Google's technology will not suggest gender-based pronouns because the risk is just too high that its smart compose technology might predict someone's sex or gender identity incorrectly and offend users. So the latest decision follows an announcement from Google CEO Sundar Pichai, who said in June of last year that the company is, quote, strengthening its commitment to racial equity and inclusion and will work to build sustainable equity for its Black plus community. Pichai said Google will be establishing anti-racism educational programs to focus on, quote, better supporting the mental and physical and health and well-being of our Black plus community. So what's the left saying? Well, I mean, for the most part, this is kind of a result, a product of the left, which is, to blur the lines between the sexes, while at the same time putting a higher contrast between differing ethnicities. And all in the name of inclusion and social justice. So it's the right saying. Well, over the last couple of years, people on the right and even some on the left, like Barry Wise and Bill Maher, have been critical of things like critical race theory, as well as the embrace of an LGBT agenda that kind of erases the female experience. That's something that J.K. Rowling has spoken out about, and Abigail Schreier, a journalist and author who's talked about transgenderism, she's talked about how this is sort of erasing the female experience by going completely gender neutral and eliminating the differences between the sexes. So why does it matter? I have to say that I'm not actually, I know this will be a controversial opinion, I'm not actually entirely opposed to the shift to embrace terms like mail carrier or chairperson. I used those terms growing up, and I think they taught me a valuable lesson as a little kid that, there aren't jobs that are just for men and there aren't jobs that are just for women. But what worries me as a conservative and most importantly as a Christian is the reasoning behind Google's decision, right? Like it's over a concern that it might offend someone by misgendering
Yeah.
them. And that's the issue, and that's where I have a problem, because as Christians we know what God designed. God created two sexes, male and female, in His image that are distinctly different by design. We shouldn't be condemning people just for having a different perspective as Christians. Really, we should approach it with compassion, I think, because so many people are searching for identity, right? They have a void, and they're looking for some sort of way to fill it. I think people are desperate to know what their identity is, and unfortunately, the secular world and our woke culture is giving them all the wrong answers about where their identity
Yeah.
is. Our identity is in Christ. I think we need to be doing our best to infuse that into the conversation, because there are distinct sexes, there are distinct differences between the two that God designed on purpose. But first, we need to help people understand their identity in Christ, and then hopefully they can come on to understand a theologically accurate view of sexuality.
Yeah, and I just don't need um, the wokeness in my autocorrect. Right? Autocorrect is
Yes, I
annoying
agree with
enough.
that.
It's so annoying as it is. I mean, especially on iPhone when you're trying to type something, anything
Yeah,
that's remotely slang or something like that, it just fills in the most bizarre stuff of all time, or it doesn't believe you really want to type that. And I always forget to hit the word on the bottom. And so I just keep retyping it. I'm like, no, I really mean this. I really mean what I'm
yeah,
saying here. And then so I don't need them like going, do you really? It's like they're going to be like my woke conscience, like whenever you're typing something, like, you
yes.
don't really mean that, do you? Here's the approved language in here. I mean, I just don't know that I'm ready for that yet from my
Yeah,
Google Docs and autocorrect.
I
So
do think, yeah, the language police thing there is kind of an issue. You know, if somebody wants to say mailman, I don't think we need to have anybody correcting them for choosing
no,
to use that word. I mean, like if that's the word you want to use,
yeah,
not a big deal. Like
no,
and if it's going to offend somebody, uh, maybe grow a thicker skin, I guess would be my
yeah,
uh, my
yeah.
n- non-compassionate answer on that particular issue.
I mean, it just seems like policing our language like this just doesn't seem like it's going to end well. We're gonna be allowed to
Yeah,
say like
no.
3 words when this is all said and done.
And unfortunately, I think that the issue with this like more inclusive language is that eventually our words will just kind of be meaningless, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just the more we limit it and the more we put caveats on the words that we use, the less descriptive they actually become until they're just kind of like a nebulous words that can mean whatever we want them to
yeah.
mean.
Absolutely. 100%. All right, on to story number 3. And this is Hillsong. We've got the latest here from Brian Houston, who's the founder of Hillsong Church. And he went on the Today Show and he spoke about the scandals that have troubled the church, including the firing of high-profile pastor Carl Lentz for moral failures. He turned out he was unfaithful for his wife. It was kind of a spectacular fall from grace there. And he said on the interview today, he said, I do think that we did allow a culture to develop where it was one rule for celebrities and a different rule for other people. Despite that observation and reflection, though, Houston rejected the idea that he was more tolerant of Lentz due to his friendships with Justin Bieber and other celebrities. He said, I find it annoying that people thought it was important to me and my wife, Bobby, to attract famous people to church, he said. And so he went on to say that was not their intention. And obviously that their beliefs are much deeper than that. Houston also told them that he had concerns and many conversations over the years with Carl about his behavior. He said, I think there's a lot of things I should have known earlier, and hopefully moving forward, we'll make sure we have a better system in place and better accountability. When asked if the problems facing the church had come from growing too large, being too big of a church, Houston said, I'm not sure church can be too big. I just think we have to grow into ourselves. And so he said the investigation into the church made him realize that Hillsong leadership needs to put in much more structure in the church globally. And he said, in addition to cultural changes, we will be implementing significant structural changes and enacting new policies and procedures in order to rectify the issues we've uncovered. So why does it matter? I mean, this one's not really a left-right issue per se, off the bat that people are debating right now, but it matters because, there are implications when a major Christian figure has a fall from grace like this. First and foremost, it causes kind of like this glee from unbelievers who use the occurrence to sort of spike the football on the church. That I told you so, just the church, do as I say, not as I do. I mean, we saw the same thing with the Ravi Zacharias fallout. And they've since changed the name of RZIM, rebranded, kind of removed all of his teaching from there. And people, had that reaction. And so that's first and foremost is that, you're giving you're allowing Christ to have a bad name when these things happen. So especially in such a high profile way. Second, I think we need to be praying for our church leaders because, like it or not, the things that happen in their personal life, their personal shortcomings are going to be associated with the name of Christ. They're going to have big implications, as I said. So we got to be praying for these leaders in these positions that they aren't tempted by all the. I mean, Carl Lentz was around so much fame and celebrity. You can imagine the temptation that was kind of coming his way. And I think thirdly, Trey, I mean, I think seeking fame and fortune, whether it's, nationally or just locally, I think it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's proven that way to a faith walk. I mean, I look at people like Bieber and even local pastors who are kind of like a big deal in their neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Again, I just want to pray for them because I think they have a big target on their back. I think the enemy would like nothing more than to see them stumble and fall.
Yeah, I think that's true, unfortunately. And like growing up, I always was taught like, be on your best behavior, do what's right because you're representing the family name, right? That was something
Hmm.
that we heard a lot. Or like whatever school you go to, when you go on a school trip, your teachers or your principal always tells you, be on your best behavior because you're representing the school.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, even more so to a greater degree, of course, for believers. And Scripture tells us that our spiritual leaders are held to a higher standard. And I think there's a reason, and this is the reason, because I don't really blame the secular, unbelieving world for their knee-jerk reaction of "I told you so." Like, look, this is what happens. Because we have a responsibility to say, I'm a believer, so I'm holding myself to a higher standard, and a lot of times that, or all the time, that means you put an accountability around
Yeah.
you of people who are going to help hold you accountable because not any one of us can do that on our own. We're designed to be in community, and we need that kind of accountability system around us. And I think that's the tricky part when we start having like celebrity preachers, because the higher you get on that ladder, the more popular you get. I think it's harder to surround yourself with people who are going to call you out. Like it's easier to surround yourself with yes men and yes women because you're a celebrity.
Yeah.
So I think it's a tricky thing to navigate, and I hope that the church, Hillsong, learns from this, and also other churches, like you said, churches that have like little local celebrities. I hope that we all can learn from this cautionary tale that it's important to hold ourselves accountable, to surround ourselves with community, and as leaders to be transparent and to hold ourselves to a higher standard because we're representing Christ above anything else, and any action that we take either reflects Christ in a good way or it tarnishes people's view of Christ. So it matters.
Amen. Amen.
All right, story number 4. So Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is at the halfway point in her term in office. It's a 4-year term, and she announced this week that she is only accepting interviews from Black and brown journalists. A decision she said is necessary because of the overwhelming whiteness and maleness of Chicago's media institutions. That's how she described the landscape there. And Lightfoot is the first Black woman to be mayor of the city, we should note. So she said, in looking at the absence of diversity across the City Hall press corps and other newsrooms, sadly, it does not appear that many of the media institutions in Chicago have caught on and truly have not embraced this moment. And looking at the absence of diversity across the City Hall press corps and other newsrooms, she decided that she needed to make this change. Like she needed to shift away because there are just too many white journalists in the press corps, and she needed to make this decision to only talk to minority reporters on her halfway point. So Lightfoot admitted that most of the journalists she's worked with are smart and hardworking, but complained that they are, like I said, mostly white. So what's the left saying? Well, Lightfoot is a Democrat and is really just kind of putting critical race theory principles into practice with this. So it hasn't garnered a whole lot of objections from her fellow Democrats. So what's the right saying? Well, several conservative voices have condemned Lightfoot for the decision. Many have even called it a racist move. Senator Ted Cruz condemned Lightfoot for what he called her overt racism, while commentator James Gudersky said, "This is what systemic racism looks like," obviously taking a shot at many Democrats who have said that the country is systemically racist. Interestingly, though, one Latino reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Gregory Pratt, he said that he was granted an interview with Lightfoot. He then asked the mayor's office to lift the ban on white reporters as part of the agreement to do the interview, and the mayor refused. So the Tribune actually canceled its interview with her and said that they're not doing the interview until Lightfoot agrees to take questions from any reporter, regardless of the color of their skin. So good for the Tribune there. So why does it matter? Well, this is just blatant racism. I think that's why it matters. Except right now, it's kind of in vogue. So it's okay and it's culturally cool even to be racist in this way at the moment. I think, unfortunately, Dan, that this is only going to cause even greater division, and it's going to be more harmful to our country than helpful. We're already seeing the fruit of that, the consequences of this kind of stuff. Our country is more divided now, I think, than it's ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So as Christians, obviously we know better. We need to be doing what we can to infuse a gospel-centered ethic into our society when it comes to ethnicity, one that sees innate value in all human beings as God's image bearers, irrespective of the color of their skin, the country they come from, their sex. The more that we divide people, the obvious answer to that is the more it's going to cause division.
Yeah.
I don't see how we think this is going to be helpful in any way.
Yeah, and you just hope that maybe when these sorts of ideas start coming forward, that it becomes more clear to people the problem with a lot of these theories, like critical race theory, where it pits everybody against each other. The only way we should be grouping one another is grouping us in the category of the human race. That is the one thing we all have in common, and that doesn't discount our different lived experiences and whatnot. But ultimately, if we just seek to put each other in different groups, Republican, Democrat, Christian, atheist, this and that, and we just separate everybody and we just view each other as different tribes and different beliefs and different boxes, like you said, it's just going to serve to divide us more. And you look at, we're a country that, are trying to recover from horrible segregation and horrible things that we did to African Americans in this country. And you're seeing literally the exact same ideas put in place in reverse. So it's like, it makes you question, did you really think the idea was bad, or you just didn't like it because it happened to people that look like you? It's really disturbing, as you said. I mean, you just think about it. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to think, well, that idea of interviewing only a certain race of people, letting them have access to, first of all, a public figure that's supposed to represent all people, to only let certain people interview is just so blatantly bigoted, racist. If you flipped it around and said, well, only white people are going to be able to interview me, I mean, it sounds so ridiculous. And hopefully these sorts of ideas are just swatted down for the, ridiculous ideas that they are.
Yeah, and it's sad to see that the pendulum is always swinging on any number of issues. Like with COVID, for example, I know we've talked about on the podcast before, the way that the Biden administration has been maybe a little bit overly cautious because they wanted to correct from the way the Trump administration handled it in their view. So the pendulum has swung, and it maybe swung a bit too far. And I think this is on a more dangerous level, what we're seeing with race and with this and all that. I think the pendulum has swung so far that it's overcorrected, and it's going to end up causing more harm than good. I know Vodi Bakum, who we've talked about several times and we interviewed, he has said the same thing. He said, I'm afraid that this kind of stuff is going to cause actual white supremacy and actual violent racist reactions from people because of the division and the anger that it's stoking. So I just hope that maybe cooler heads will prevail and people on both sides, left and right, we'll be like Bill Maher and Barry Weiss and kind of standing up and saying, I'm all for correcting some of the sins of the past and for addressing those and for acknowledging people's experiences. But this is not going to help. This is
No.
only going to make the problem worse.
Yeah. And we can only just pray right now and, speak out where it makes sense in your own circles.
Yeah.
But that is all the time we have for today, Trey. We will be back here tomorrow with more news from a Christian perspective. As always, head on over to cbnnews.com and head on over to faithwire.com. You're going to get more news over there. I mean, we've got everything on CBN and Faithwire with what's going on with Israel and Gaza and Hamas and all that and more. So God bless. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow. Okay, that's taping for today. Snow Piper, she did a great job.
I know she did. She was on her best behavior today, so maybe I'll have to give her an extra treat once we finish up here.
Yeah, indeed. And this Lori Lightfoot, I mean, we just continuing the conversation here for just a second. I mean,
Yeah.
has anyone on the left? I know you mentioned that we haven't seen much on there. You got to wonder if anyone on the left has actually spoken out about this. Because that one it seems like jumping the shark. I mean, it seems like jumping the shark, even for as far as woke ideas go.
Yeah, it's just like it's so on its face, like obvious, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen a whole lot of progressive voices saying anything about it. But like I said during the podcast, I mean, I was surprised, but really major kudos to the Tribune for willing to stand up, because they could have easily gotten the interview, right?
Yeah.
And they could have gotten a whole lot of clicks and a whole lot of views for their story, and whatever. That would have been great for the journalist's resume, whatever. But
right.
I'm glad that they took the stand that they did, and I'm hoping more people will kind of stand up.
I bet you Bill Maher does something on it. You can count on Bill Maher. I mean, he's been calling out a lot of these, taking it a step too far ideas. So he's one voice on the left that you can count on for that. So, all right.
We can only hope.
Yeah, we can only hope.